forgotten comedy great now on BBC Two in a BBC Four biography of Marty Feldman.
Before we start the programme, we would like to remind viewers that at this time of the year, when a lot of people leave their windows open, a television set or a radio set playing full blast can be a great source of irritation to your neighbours. Another good way to irritate them is to set fire to their dustbin.
There's a game people play around the idea that anyone can be connected to anyone else via 6 degrees of separation. This programme is about Marty Feldman, and it's a kind of comedy version of that game, because as a writer and performer, Marty is a kind of missing link between the golden age of radio comedy.
Good morning, I'm Julian, this is my friend Sandy.
To the comedy hothouse of the 1960s.
He had a wonderful, wonderful comic presence.
I don't remember any great difference between what we were trying to write for Marty and what we eventually ended up in writing for Python.
And finally, on to Hollywood.
When I was writing the part of Igor, I was thinking of Marty.
Despite the kind of knockabout quality of Marty that he projected, was, I think, a very sensitive, vulnerable guy.
This is Marty Feldman, 6 degrees of separation.
All I have is what's in there, yeah? That belongs to me. The thing to do is to keep people out of it. Well, unless you invite them in, as I'm inviting you in.
Marty was born in 1934, the first son of a hard-working Jewish immigrant couple from North London.
My memories of my childhood, it was fairly solitary. And when the war came, my father joined the army. So I was looked after, evacuated into the country and looked after by strange families. Memories of being a solitary kid, because I was the odd one out. All the other kids came from the country.
He left school at 15 and worked in a fairground in Margate. From there, it was onto the stage as part of a music hall act, Marty, Morris and Mitch.
You couldn't really register Marty as an individual in this act because they were all dressed similarly and they had rather deadpan expressions and did things in unison, and it was very physical. They hit each other and all that sort of thing. It was very funny.
But Marty also had another passion.
One of the most important things in my life is music. I worked briefly as a jazz musician in my middle teens. I used to hang about in Archer Street on Monday afternoons looking for work. I was a trumpet player, according to one well-known critic, the worst in the world.
It was through music he met the woman he would be married to for 23 years.
It's like this every morning, I tell you. 15 years and I still fancy her.
Get out. See you later. Bye. Silly sod. If I wasn't married to him, I'd like him to be my best friend. Which is all I can say about him. I would really. Not only is he my husband, but he's my best friend. Why do I love you?
You can tell the truth now.
I like him because he's...
Because I'm adorable, because I'm handsome.
Yeah,
because of that
no.
profile.
Yeah, no.
Because of that smile. Because of those eyes. Because I'm so sexy.
Marty was earning extra money as a writer, alongside a friend and fellow performer from the music halls, Barry Took. He and Marty had started out selling gags to radio stars like Frankie Howard for a couple of shillings a time.
Is that it already? Oh, here, listen, no, I've had a shocking week. Oh, no, don't laugh. Mrs. It's wicked among the afflicted. No, I've had a shocking week. No, it's Tuesday. No,
By the early 60s, the unlikely pair had become a successful writing team.
Barry was tall, over 6 foot, quite skinny in those days, those early days, with thick, rimmed specs, and Marty was considerably shorter with a shock of blonde hair.
Marty used to claim that neither he nor I wrote the script, but a third person would enter the room, somebody called Marty Took or Barry Feldman, who would do all the writing. We were so in tune with each other for those 10 years that we wrote every day at our working nights.
A collaboration is A plus B writing a script. A successful collaboration is A multiplied by B writing a script.
The workload spiralled as Barry and Marty were signed up by the biggest radio shows of the day.
Marty started knocking out the stuff on Barry's typewriter. But in fact, they had to stop doing that after a while because their minds worked so quickly once they were onto a theme. Then it got to that the ideas were coming so thick and fast that Marty couldn't type fast enough. And Barry used to write in longhand, and his longhand was quite rapid, which would then all be passed to me to type. But of course I used to hear them, and always the sound coming most from where they were working was laughter.
What about that time when you got that walnut stuck up your nose? What about
In 1962, they moved from BBC to ITV, their first television show, and an instant hit, Bootsy and Snudge.
Could have gone round the corner and got a bottle of Calmaline lotion.
Calmaline.
What?
Calmaline. Calmaline.
It was very, very successful. Marty and Barry were in the front rank of writers of the 60s.
During the writing of Bootsy and Snudge, Marty became seriously ill. He had an operation for an overactive thyroid.
Marty went off to have the operation for the thyroid, which apparently was very serious. And it was after that that his eyes were noticeably enlarged, I would say.
Unconcerned about his new look, Marty and Barry were lured back to radio. Together, they created a show which would become a classic.
Good morning, I'm Julian. This is my friend Sandy.
Yes, we're from the Daily Polari. Yes. He's the man you follow around, I'm the one you can't gag. Can't gag.
True. Can we have 5 minutes of your time?
Well, it depends what you want to do with them.
Oh, well.
The world of the camp chorus boys was well known to the writers from their days in Variety.
Backstage, everybody's camp. That's it. And the chat was Polari, and it was a sort of shorthand.
Well, our editor said, why don't you troll off up to Mr. Orne's latte?
That's flat or house, translator's note.
Yes, that's, and have a Polari with him, you see.
Yes,
Polari.
we'd like to have something hot and personal.
Well, how,
There was Mrs. Mary Whitehouse and Sir Cyril Black, who had set themselves up as the protectors of public ears, noses and throats, or whatever you want to call them, who complained to the DG. He'd call for the script and send it back with a note, I see nothing to object to in this. And those were his words written on the script.
Joe, he was a young court wangler, munging greebles he did go.
Barry and Marty started inventing these lovely words, moolies and woggle irons and what's in the gander bag and all that stuff. And they got wilder and wilder.
Vain she was, and like a grusset, though her gander parts were fine. But she sneered at his cord wangle as it hung upon the line.
Round the Horn was one of the things we all adored, and Marty Feldman and Barry Took and so on. And so that one became, even before that, aware of Marty's work. And then when it came to doing the Frost Report, we asked him if he'd be the sort of script editor on that, which was terrific.
Thank you very much indeed. Tonight, class.
Marty was experienced. very experienced at that time. But, you know, you can get people who are extremely experienced who can be very, very sort of standoffish and a little sort of distant. Marty, I think, just loved humour. He loved the way jokes were made, how they were written, and was interested in, I suppose, the younger writers coming up. And I've always remembered it when I've been in the same position and new writers or people have come along. Make sure you just go up and say hello, because that meant a lot to me. And Marty was the first one who really said hello to me. So then I felt I was okay there.
Frost had assembled a group of fledgling writers who would go on to become some of the most celebrated names in British comedy.
I think they all admired him a great deal, so that any advice he had was very valuable, both at the meetings, the writers' meetings, the day after the previous show, and he would be really on the ball and giving them a steer, I suppose you'd say. So what he brought to it was the ability of the veteran centre-half to look after the defence.
Marty also co-wrote the Frost Report's most famous sketch.
I look down on him because I am upper class.
It was the first of many TV landmarks which carried Marty's touch.
But I look down on him because he is lower class. I am middle class.
I know my place. I look up to them both, but I don't look up to him as high as I look up to him, because he's got innate reading.
After I had done the first series of the Frost Report, David said to me, why don't you put a little group together and do a short series for rediffusion this autumn?
At last, the 1948 show!
We needed a fourth. We knew we needed a fourth. And we were desperately looking around to see who would be right from our chums. And I don't know whether it was John rang me or I rang him, but we'd both come up with Marty.
He'd been never proposed for appearing in a show at all, partially because he was so good behind the scenes, but also because of his unusual looks and so on, you know, that people had not thought to put him on screen. And we were trying to do something fresh, and so I thought, great idea, John.
And we did the pilot, and it was very good. And David Frost came out and said, it's very good indeed. I won't do an impression. And he said, I'm not too sure about Marty's eyes. I'm not sure that the public will accept that. And of course, it's been a fortune ever since.
Right, come in, lads.
None of us were that confident. We were ex-students that weren't quite sure whether we were any good or not. And so it was I think the best thing of all is a team thing. Marty fitted in straight away, I was told later that he wasn't confident. He seemed more confident than I was, certainly. And had that extra, I don't know what it was, something that sparked.
I think with my English rose complexion, so I think it's definitely me. So.
Well, with that cleared up, we should be all right.
No.
Were you at all worried about your perfume, any of you?
Oh, yes.
When Marty came with us, he was a little bit nervous, and he said, look, guys, you've got to help me a bit, because he didn't have particularly good technique. So he needed a certain amount of support and a certain amount of extra rehearsal.
John and Tim were very good at drawing him out. And there were some things that Marty did, I think, what comes to me as I say it, is a sketch in which they all spoke with the same voice. Sidney Lotterby.
My name's Sidney Lotterby. Oh, there's a turn-up. My name's Sidney Lotterby. So's mine. And mine? Well, isn't it a coincidence all being called Sidney Lotterby?
That was a Marty voice, you know. And I think they nurtured him through that. He began it a bit tentatively, but he gained enormous confidence.
Well, what's your line of business, Mr. Lotterby? Wholesale greengrocery? Really?
Then when I went to the BBC to work, and who should turn up as our producer was a man called Sidney Lotterby. And I didn't know he existed.
It takes all sorts to make a world. Well, forgive me saying this, but I wasn't.
He became sort of a star of the show, really, in a way, and this wonderful contrast between him and Cleese. And I always liked Marty's performances.
You could see through all this period, in Marty's case, but also in John's and Graham's, the developing, and then the next step after, very much after the last 1948 show, was Python.
People now regard The Four Yorkshiremen as a classic Python sketch, and it wasn't a Python sketch at all. It was a sketch from 1948 show.
Hey, you were lucky to have a leg. There are over 150 of us living in a small shoebox in the middle of the road.
Cardboard box?
Right.
Oh, you were lucky. We lived for 3 months in a rolled-up newspaper in a septic tank.
We all have slightly different memories of how it was written. I think Marty and I wrote it, and John, Cleese and Graham didn't ruin it.
Aye, and you try and tell that to the young people of today. Will they believe you?
No! He stood out from quite early on. In the first series, the critics tended to pick me out. Then when we did it again, the next series in '67, then they all started to pick Marty out. And he had a wonderful, wonderful comic presence.
I don't have ambitions in the conventional sense of goals or objects in view. I've always worked on the basis of doing what seemed like a good idea at the time.
Marty was obviously a huge success at the 48 show, and the BBC asked him to do a series. I think he was pretty insecure, and he asked me to go with him, basically, to hold his hand.
Morning. Oh, well, good morning, Your Grace.
Morning.
Morning. Bit parky this morning, ain't it, Flop?
It is a trifle chilly, Your Grace.
Chilly? It's brass monkeys, ain't it, Flop?
It was brilliant that at that particular time he was given his own show so quickly, because he had a lot of friends, Barry Took and people like that, who would help write for the show. And also he had the backing of fellow performers that got on with him. But don't take anything away from him. That was his show.
Nice little service. How about him then, eh? Fancy him? Cop for a book, son? And you? There you go, son. One for you. Right. How about him, number 42, Oli, Oli, Oli? All the Oli's 42.
There were occasionally sketches like as the Bishop, you know, where you could see people thinking, gosh, I hope I don't meet him on a train.
1, 2. Lord God Almighty, come on then. Sing louder than that, come on, my son.
But then he became a star, and he could have done anything he wanted to.
I guess he admired the silent comedians, Keaton obviously, and at a time when a lot of people were happier doing sketches in studios, Marty did think that, you know, the cinematic side of television should be explored, the visual side. Instead of it just being sort of Benny Hill slapstick jokes, you could create something slightly more complex, silent comedy, and he could do that very well because he was such a remarkable character. You never took your eye off Marty once he was on screen.
With Marty's series, there was a lot of money spent. The budget for the first series went on the film. Now, you do all the filming before you even get into the studio, so you'd still got 7 shows or whatever it was to do. But they seemed to get the extra budget, and I think it was well spent. I mean, if you're going to do it properly.
A year before they created their own show, the key Pythons were together writing for Marty's BBC series.
1 or 2 of the sketches we wrote very much with Marty in mind, because there was a particular type of character that he would play. We used to call Mr. Pest. He would come into a shop or a government office and would usually finish by driving the guy behind the counter mad and smashing the shop up.
Look, you want to see the Edinburgh Festival.
Yes, we want to see the Edinburgh Festival.
Edinburgh Festival.
Therefore, you have got to travel to Edinburgh.
Why?
Yes, answer that, young man. You're so clever.
Because Edinburgh is the only place that has an Edinburgh Festival.
Anybody who's worked in an office somewhere that people come in and complain have met these people who will start to ask a question and then they go completely off on a tangent.
Look, you stupid old fools!
Oh.
I can't shift Edinburgh!
Stupid old fool!
There's gratitude.
He died in the war for people like you.
I did, yeah.
He knew the sort of the comic potential of someone who wouldn't shut up. And I loved that, you know, it was a great persona.
Once Marty got an audience, it's true of most of us, particularly Marty, then he would give a lot more.
How many animals have you got in there, then? Just the one. It's a thing. Oh.
The Monster in the Basket, you could see that was him enjoying it, enjoying the audience, and of course it was a much better performance because of that. He was, like most of us, a show-off, but he was very good when there was an audience there.
Is it tame? Oh, up to a point.
I was the monster in the basket. Mart used to have the umbrella and he used to start to try to quieten the beast. So he'd open it and he'd start giving me that idea, you know, do a bit of that, throw a few feathers out and some water, you know, like this beast was doing. But then as he got into it, I had to fight with him. He got so physical, it was really a proper fight. And I'm going, Mart, it's only a sketch, Mart. It was spontaneous, you know, he just felt, that's how he felt it was going to happen. You couldn't rehearse what we did in that sketch, because I would never have gone on.
Marty did catch the imagination. People liked Marty very much, and he very, very soon, from, you know, only a year or so after acting for the first time, became this rising star of BBC. It was a popular show, and it was a very good show to work on.
I'm a comic because I enjoy it. But with the pressure of having to be funny all the time, I find that I enjoy it less and less. Comedy performing, well, for me anyway, is a kind of neurosis which I exploit. You plagiarize your inadequacies, your hang-ups, and you make comic capital out of them. Comedy, like sodomy, is an unnatural act.
I think that's Marty's biggest failing. Honest to God, I really do. The perfectionist in him, he takes it too far. I know everybody says, well, thank God, you know, it's good to be a perfectionist. But if you're that much of a perfectionist, then you can lose sight of something terribly good. And he has done. I remember watching the show once, and it was all bad as far as he was concerned, but he was wrong.
The winner's plaque to the team of writers for Marty, to be received by Marty Feldman on their behalf.
When they did the second series, a very odd thing happened. Graham and I went on writing exactly the same kind of material, and then they returned all of it but one sketch. And we were pretty startled because we thought it was good material. But what we'd not realized was that Marty really had now turned into a big star, not just as a matter of fact, but also in his own head. And what he did not like about the material that Graham and I were writing for him was there wasn't a particular star part. It was just, they were just funny sketches. And to let you know the material actually was okay, we did all of it bar one sketch later on for Monty Python.
I remember going around to see Marty, and I think he must have moved to a new apartment in Maida Vale. And Teri and I went round to discuss something or other. I think it must have been his series. And we were shown up, and the whole apartment looked like it was something out of LA. Suddenly it was all white and modern and all that. And we waited, and Marty, after quite a while, which I always thought was a sign of celebrity when you have to wait for them to appear, after quite a while, Marty sort of walked down the spiral staircase towards us in this dressing gown. And I thought, this is extremely Hollywood. Here was Marty, sort of seemed to be enjoying a certain sort of lifestyle. And Teri and I thought, yeah, Marty's made it.
By the time Marty got his own BBC television series, he was completely accepted. He was in the newspapers a lot. They were printing stories about him, quite apart from his performing abilities and so on. So he was a star of the 60s.
He may have been a big name, but rather than trendy night spots, he preferred to hang around in Soho jazz clubs.
In a sense, comedians do go off on a rant like jazz musicians go off on a riff.
There's something about the excitement of improvisation in jazz, which is very like the feeling you get when you're inventing comedy spontaneously. A feeling of what is happening now, of creating a mood, an atmosphere.
It's that sort of flight of fancy. That it's like a jazz musician sort of taking a basis or a core and then running with it, you know. And I think there's you often find comedians sort of drawn to jazz. Certainly Dudley Moore, but Spike loved jazz. Yeah, he was a huge fan of it. And I think I think it's a very close sort of relationship between comedy and jazz musicians.
By now, this reluctant star had become a direct link between the golden age of radio and the newly emerging Pythons, who were about to take the world by storm. But his own stardom still wasn't enough for him.
Television is a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. Neither the budget nor the time available seems to me enough to do things the way I'd like to do them.
Looked a bloody mess to me, that move. It did, it was very untidy coming Looked a terrible mess to me.
151, take one.
Go! Get about!
Scored a goal!
I've never been really satisfied with anything I've done, and I hope I never am. But I think I'll get nearer to what I want, making films for the cinema.
Marty's first venture into the movies was a British comedy he wrote with Barry Took called Every Home Should Have One, with Marty playing it straight as an ad executive. It's remembered now only by the most ardent comedy historians.
While the film can in no way be described as one of the great milestones of cinema, it did have moments which let us see what Marty could have done.
I don't recall that Marty found it difficult playing a straight guy. I think it was more difficult for the audience to accept him as a straight man.
But the film did allow Marty the chance to create some elaborate and dangerous physical stunts, very much in the spirit of his hero, the silent great Buster Keaton.
Marty was fearless. He was a totally fearless man. When we came to the finale, the chase in the prop room, I think the spirit of Keaton probably got into Marty at that point.
Well, I feel about Keaton like the average organ player feels about Bach. It transcends influence. He's the most perfect thing I ever saw, you know. He's an object lesson for every comedian, for every visual comedian.
Keaton was an absolute master of his body, and he was also a master of screen technique. It was that command that I think Marty spent the last part of his life striving after.
Call Marty Feldman.
Marty may have been established, but he wasn't establishment.
Call Marty Feldman!
What's that spell?
And he was ready to prove it in the High Court. In 1971, the editors of counterculture magazine Oz were tried for obscenity in what would become a landmark case over freedom of speech.
I thought, Oz is basically meant to be a joke, perhaps not a very good joke. Why not get the man who was identified with the best of British humour, someone like Marty Feldman? He allowed us to come and see him. I remember showing him the cartoons, but he said, look, this is funny, this is humour. People should be allowed, kids should be allowed to satirise masters who beat them, who are sadists. He said, yes, I was beaten, yes, I had a master like that. Of course, I'll testify, even though he stood to lose quite a lot.
No, it's okay. The witness does not want to take an oath, my lord. Just ask me your questions. I'll answer any questions.
Mr. Feldman, if you wish to give evidence in court in this country...
Marty said, I want to affirm. Judge Argyll, who was a dreadful judge and a dreadful man, and actually used this in quite a formidable way. And he said, witness, why do you want to affirm?
I think there are more obscene things in the Bible than in this issue of ours.
That's not what I wanted to hear.
He was furious that we'd called Marty Feldman because he knew that Marty might, because he was a lovable character, might sway the jury. So he was determined, I think, to put pressure on him.
In a dictatorship, one of the first things they try to do is outlaw ridicule. Hitler did this and Franco did this. And there are some who are trying to do this today.
I don't know if it matters, but I can't hear what the witness is saying.
Well, I think it matters. Shall I say it louder?
Well, I thought this isn't going according to plan.
Am I speaking loud enough for you, Judge? Oh, sorry. Am I waking you up?
And this might be funny in comedy, but this was a courtroom, not a theatre.
The judge pretended I wasn't there, the boring old fart.
He was, I think, a very courageous figure, because it was before artists were political. Today, of course, you can't stop them jumping on anti-censorship bandwagons. But in those days, it took a lot of guts to step up to the plate and to stand up for a principle. The fact that Marty was prepared to come along and line up with the defence and with free speech was an important factor in getting the acquittal on the most serious charge, which has never been used again.
In the early 70s, Marty was poached from the BBC by impresario Lou Grade to make a series for ATV. But the show would have very different arrangements because it was co-produced with American television. It would be aired on both sides of the Atlantic.
I remember being asked to write for Marty's, what we called his American show, because it was very much geared for the American market.
The Marty Feldman Comedy Machine, starring... must be an identikit picture.
I remember in our sort of cussedly British way being rather irritated by the fact that we were required to turn up and sit in a room at Elstree with other writers. We never did this. Writing was a cottage industry. You did it at home and you took the material in, which is what happened with Python largely. And this was being done completely differently. And I remember a lot of muttering, don't want to get involved in that, 9 to 5 writing jokes in a sort of factory.
While the Pythons went their own way, Marty recruited his old friend Spike Milligan. As this rarely seen sketch shows, Marty's fellow jazz fan also shared a love of silent comedy. The show also brought in writing talent from American television.
5, 4, 3. I thought it was fantastic. I mean, he was totally different than anybody
I had seen. He was this kind of throwback in a way because he was an amazingly physical comedian, you know, and this kind of face and whatever. So there was something very unusual, which I found, you know, absolutely fascinating.
There was something about Marty that was period anyway, a very distinctive, you know, almost solitary period, but he didn't look contemporary, and the silence were perfect for him.
If he would have been back in the age of the silent movies, he probably would have been one of the great revered silent comics.
He was just very intent on nailing whatever the piece of material was, and very often it was a physical piece.
Cutting up. And we'd just like to say goodnight on behalf of everybody who's here.
We got to the end of this sketch. I can't remember the sketch now, but I know that the curtain, like the iron, was going up. So the tag was over, but Marty thought he'd just add to it.
From London, in England, we'd just like to say goodnight. And thank you for coming to the show. See you next time.
Well, while the curtain never actually came down in that sketch, I did. I fell from the top of it and I broke my arm. The way they've set it.
Marty's unique approach seemed not to fit the American way of doing things.
You know, American audiences are much more comfortable with, hi, here we are, here's what we got for you this week. And so it's the personality in the person's living room.
But it wasn't long before Marty was heading off to the States.
To suddenly leap from Last Line of 48, the Marty show, to the Dean Martin show, you'd sell your mother. But you had a feeling that once he was on the ladder, he wasn't going to knock people out of the way. He was very loyal and friendly, but he was going to get there. And it was slightly at the expense of his own skill, I thought. The danger is, I speak from a cosy British Radio 4 background, but I think you lose a bit when you leave Julian and Sandy behind and go to Hollywood. It's sheer envy. You do understand that, don't you?
Marty had become well known on American TV, and now Hollywood was calling. As he and Lauretta flew off to the States, he saw the chance to follow in the footsteps of his idol, Buster Keaton.
Goodbye.
Even so, he was fully aware of the dangers of working in Hollywood.
I see the way that Keaton's career went, that somebody as great as Keaton, and you can't get any greater, was destroyed by the Hollywood machine. And they took away his freedom, and they destroyed him. And I keep thinking of Keaton. I carry his photo around to remind me of what the system can do to me too. If it can do it to Keaton, who was the best of them all, and it can easily do it to me.
He'd gone from radio to TV. Now Marty was about to link up with a new circle of comedy greats.
It's coming from the deep, dark recesses of the mind of Mel Brooks.
And his scene-stealing debut role had been created especially for him.
Sky means business. Starring Gene Wilder as Dr.
Every Saturday night, I would watch the Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. So when I was writing the part of Igor, formerly Igor, I was thinking of Marty.
You must be Igor. No, it's pronounced Igor. But they told me it was Igor. Well, they were wrong then, weren't they? Allow me, master.
Oh, thanks very much.
Walk this way. This way.
Peter Boyle, who plays the monster in it,
was called for 2 hours makeup. I arrived in the morning and I said, you don't need any makeup. To play a freak, that's what's so humiliating. 5 minutes, you know, just a bit of eyes.
Yeah.
That's pretty me up to play a freak. It was terrible.
A scene that we thought was going to be fireworks was Madeline Kahn arriving in Transylvania, arriving at the castle, and it was falling flat. We couldn't figure it out.
Darling.
Darling!
Surprise?
And Mel was deep in thought for a little while, and he said, Marty, when Jean says, Igor, help me with these bags, you say, certainly, you take the blonde, I'll take the one in the toy bin.
Igor, would you give me a hand with the bags?
Certainly. You take the blonde and I'll take the one in the toy-bin.
Marty, inspired by the moment, bit off the tail of this fox fur that Madeline was wearing around her neck, and it stuck in his mouth. And we had to play the rest of the scene looking at Marty with a fox tail in his mouth. And if you look closely, you can see some of us breaking up at that.
Stop that!
God.
But I think Hollywood found Marty. Do you know what I mean? After they'd put him on the Dean Martin show, and they probably then, you know, went and said, we've got to do something with this guy. And then got him out, and he got, of course, the Young Frankenstein. So really, they kept, you know, you're not going to sit back in Hampstead and say, oh, I don't know. You got to give it a shot. And that's what he did.
I'm sort of socialist from way back. Yeah. But in order to pay my back taxes, I have to live in America in order to earn enough money to pay the back tax I owe to the socialist government that I voted in.
That you voted in, yes, precisely.
But I can't earn enough in England to ever pay him.
Due to ill health, your brother has decided to take a short...
But Marty the movie star was already being pigeonholed. His next project was again as Gene Wilder's sidekick.
A tale of amazing feats of deduction.
And now, 20th Century Fox presents the greatest comedy event of the 20th century, Mel Brooks' silent movie.
And then another collaboration with Mel Brooks. It would be a silent movie, and Marty was delighted by the opportunity to play the silent clown.
DeLuise.
The wonderful thing about Marty was that he made it look like it was easy, and it was always extraordinary. My bird does a trick, and he wants to do it now. So he's very... He's trained. They're all trained.
Although the film turned out to be a Hollywood version of the silent movie, Marty still threw himself into the filming.
The premise of it is that Marty was trying to get, was at a bank of elevators, and he was going to go up, and all of a sudden the light would go, and he would try to go to, this one, but he got there a little late, and then there was the other one. He tried to get to that, it was too late, and it is one of those pieces of timing, and it also is about the physicality of it. It's all of the moves to make it all work. Sometimes you go, oh my God, Marty, take it easy there. I mean, he would just bang into something.
If I bump into a wall, I never hit the wall. I go up to it and then bah, and then they put a noise in. So my face never touches the wall. But Marty suddenly had this bleeding on his face, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, I don't want to fake it. So you see, there's like a little child. I used to see him, and he'd have a pot of coffee this big that held 52 cups of coffee. And he would drink it all day long. And I said, why are you drinking so much coffee? And he said, I'm on camera today, love. Which meant he wanted to have the energy, but he always subdued it. His contribution was always different, tender, soft. He was a soft, tender, sweet man.
As Silent Movie was released by Fox Studios, Marty was approached by rivals Universal Pictures with an offer to direct 3 films. It was the chance he'd been waiting for, but the studio insisted he would also have to star.
What do Young Frankenstein and Silent Movie have in common? Marty Feldman. And nothing could be more common than the last remake of Beau Geste.
I played Marty's twin brother, identical twin brother. So there you are, you're off to a sort of comic start, which involved both of us had dyed our hair this fearsome peroxided blonde. Marty's skills as a writer are evident throughout the script, and funny one-liners. And he threw quite a few my way as Beau Geste, you know. Medals are like hemorrhoids, Digby. Sooner or later, every arsehole gets one. You can't.
Marty was finally in charge of his own film, but things didn't go smoothly from the start after shooting began in Spain.
You expect with Spain a modicum of sunshine. But no, the rain in Spain fell inexorably on the plain. It was miserable. It was cold. It was colder in Madrid than in London.
He misses.
But things went from bad to worse. 3 weeks into shooting, Marty fired the editor and called in his old friend Jim Clark, the man who'd directed Marty's first film.
So I went to Madrid and I saw all the footage which the previous editor had assembled, and it wasn't good. I read the riot act to him, and I said, Marty, let's face it, the script was wonderful, but the film isn't funny. But I took a deep breath because Marty was obviously a troubled man, and he realized, he knew perfectly well that this wasn't working.
What I heard is that one of the officials at Universal went to a screening at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, alone, and watched this comedy, and didn't get it, and ordered these cuts.
And when we actually ran it for Marty and the producers at Universal that morning, I had lunch with Marty on his own afterwards, and he said, "Love, can you make it good enough for me to get another film?" That was his message. He knew that it wasn't a very funny film.
Despite his looks, Marty Feldman is no fool.
While Marty and Lauretta were sent on a promotional trip to Europe, the film was recut by Jim Clark and another editor, unbeknown to the director.
When he came back, he was confronted with a version of the film which was not his at all. It was our version. So we had a terrific row, and it was a sad occasion because I sided with the studio against my old chum, which I shouldn't have done.
A disservice was done, you know, something that was, maybe it was before its time. Maybe we had to wait a bit for the humor to catch up.
We had two versions of that film. We had the studio version and Marty's version. We previewed both versions on adjacent nights with Marty going in with his editor and us not speaking. It was a ghastly situation. However, the preview audiences on both evenings gave both versions identically bad marks.
You know, they claimed that the film didn't do well, but obviously it must have done, because to a certain extent. Otherwise, why would they entrust Marty with another, you know, go around with his next film?
For what we are about to receive.
Not many people do remember his next film.
Now, Marty Feldman casts his keen eye for comedy.
Marty played a monk set adrift in L.A.
It's not much boy meets girl, it's monk meeteth hooker, actually, is what it is.
Monk meeteth hooker?
You're not afraid of offending any religious...
Mary Magdalene didn't defend me in the Bible.
No.
She's actually one of the heroines of the Bible.
Yeah.
And I think the hookers are probably one of the most honest of professions. They have to deliver what they promise, unlike politicians.
In God we trust.
But the studio thought the religious subject matter was too sensitive for an American audience, and the film rather disappeared in a puff of holy smoke.
Universal Pictures.
The more that Marty moved into the kind of LA culture and Hollywood, in a sense, you know, you become less special than in fact you are. And I think Marty needed, you know, to be protected of a system that only wants things a certain way. And what made him special is that he wasn't that. And you can't turn him into something that he's not.
Hollywood can suddenly really over-embrace somebody and hug them to death. And I think that, you know, suddenly they gave him a movie to direct, write, and star in. And when it didn't work, you know, suddenly, from having been the new Messiah, the tide goes out and you're left sitting on this pinnacle on your own, which is a very, very rough thing to happen to anybody. And we knew him during that period too, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very painful.
He wasn't a happy person. Really, it was sad to see him, you know. And that went on for about 6 months. I think he was really going through it.
If he did want to emulate Buster Keaton, it's a sad thing to think that in a way he did, because poor Buster, you know, came to, you know, had a similar kind of career where he became a forgotten man, you know, in Hollywood.
Marty was released early from his deal with Universal by mutual agreement.
I think he was the happiest at home with Lauretta and all the friends. He never changed. I don't think he did. I don't think he took a step out of his normal behavior to try and court anybody or do anything.
You didn't really expect Marty to be with the Hollywood establishment. They were bohemians from London, and so their house was filled with a much hipper crowd. There was rock people, there was Harry Nilsson, there was actors. It was just a sort of funkier kind of people that you'd expect Marty to be around.
God, we had some nights at Marty's house with Harry and Billy Connolly and other people that would come by. They used to have great dinner parties around there, and Marty would play drums, and Lauretta would look on as like a proud mum. He was a fantastic guy. He was a man, you know, he was the kind of guy you just relished hanging out with.
In 1981, Marty got a call from an old friend.
Yellowbeard.
A bucket of rum and be quick about it.
With Graham Chapman as Yellowbeard.
Kill this stupid old bugger.
Filming began in Mexico with a huge ensemble cast.
I don't think the trip to Mexico was necessarily a career step forward. On the other hand, there was a bunch of people who were all mates. Do you know what I mean? There was Graham Chapman and other English kind of comedy people.
I'm not sure that he was crazy about going down to the heat of Mexico and doing this movie.
He probably didn't want to do it on the basis of the script, which was bad. And then on the other hand, you think, well, we're getting per diem and some really good weed down in Mexico.
This is the first thing I've done for a long while that I've not either written or directed, or sometimes both at the same time. And it's a marvellous feeling of irresponsibility. If we're behind schedule, I'd normally be biting my nails. Well, no, that's not my concern, you know. I'm an actor. Call me when you want me.
And then I got a call late one night from Graham Chapman, whose movie it was, who said, I just have this terrible news for you, that Marty just died of a heart attack. I'm sitting on that chair, practically fell off it, because there was never any indication that he was sick or in any way.
Marty Feldman, the comedian with the bulging eyes and the irreverent sense of humor, has died in Mexico City at the age of 49. He suffered a heart attack on location for his latest film, Yellowbeard.
And he said, you know, can you tell Lauretta? Well, so that was one of the worst things I'd ever had to do in my life.
Marty's buried in the Forest Lawn Cemetery in Los Angeles, near to the grave of his lifelong inspiration, Buster Keaton.
I still think he'd have liked to have been a director. If he felt it was just getting too tricky here, he could have gone back to the UK. Yes. I think he would have written more. I think he would have written a very funny autobiography.
I think he's watching us all, and I think he's still saying, you know, I'd like a chance to do that again. He always wanted another take. You know, he was good.
So that's the way the history books tell the story. Marty's own films flopped, and he died on the set of a not very good movie. But his close circle tell a different story. In the last years of his life, Marty went back to writing, in this office in Los Angeles, which had become a colony of British writers.
Bought this funky old building in Hollywood, and Marty took a room. So Marty, we were connected on a daily basis now.
Marty was back among his favourite people, writers and emerging comedy talent, just as he had been in the 60s.
He was really keen on the process of writing. And that's what our building was about. We weren't really involved in making TV shows. We were involved in the process of writing TV shows and creating TV shows, a lot of which, believe it or believe it not, although we're in the middle of Hollywood, 100 yards from Grauman's Chinese Theatre, Dick and Ian were writing episodes of Porridge, and it's where we created Our Vie de Zane Pet, was created in that building.
He fascinated me. And also, apart from the writing, this weird approach, he was such a funny man.
It was kind of nice having Marty Feldman down in the ground floor. We'd always take ideas by him and say, what do you think of this? And he had a different skew on things, you know, when you're dealing in stories and ideas. It's really interesting if you go to somebody who's just going to have an idea completely from some other place. You should do this. And then you go, oh, of course.
And so, besides his own work in radio, TV and film, Marty connects with an even greater circle of comedy. From the writers of MASH and Fawlty Towers, to the creators of Porridge and Auf Wiedersehen Pet, to national treasures and Oscar-winning directors, all connected by 6 degrees of Marty Feldman.
Right. Is it wrong to love an elephant? Is it wrong to even care? And once you've loved an elephant, should one give an elephant the air? If it's wrong to love an elephant, then I've done a terrible thing. I believe this is true, but please what can I do with this bloody enormous engagement ring?
Does that answer your question? More or less, yeah. Would you like an answer to which you have not yet given me a question? It's 14 foot long and has spots all over it. I managed to remove them with the aid of a butter knife. What's the question?
I can't think of one. I've run out.
You're a lousy interviewer.
I am. I'm terrible.
Shall we cut? Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I just sort of ran out of questions.
Let me see.